and that's in 29th Legislative District, position number 2. And tonight we have David Figuracion, who is a candidate for that position in the Republican Party. And as was briefed earlier, we'll have an opening statement of 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes. And then we have a series of 10 questions, of which you'll have 90 seconds for each of those.
All right.
Okay? All right, so now, David, for your opening statement.
Good evening. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening to come here and learn about the candidates. This is a debate, so debates are usually an opportunity for voters to find what's different between the two candidates. So I'm going to start off with one of the big differences. I'm here and she's not. One of the other differences is that she is a professional bureaucrat. She's been in government service for the last 10 years. I, on the other hand, have been working in the private sector for the last 50 years. Well, maybe not 50, maybe 49. I am a lifelong, well, I guess when you moved into Pierce County in 1961, I guess I can call myself a lifelong resident of Pierce County. I've grown up here. I love this area. A little bit about me. I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for the last 27 years. My wife and I, over the last 2 years during the COVID crisis, were just faced with a real dilemma. Do we leave the state we love, or do we leave the state we love a better place? And so we chose to stay and fight for Washington. Another difference between the two of us is that my opponent believes that the government is the solution to our problems. And like Ronald Reagan, I believe that government is our problem. And that ends my opening statement.
Cutting down on my pacing.
These people have been here for a long time, so.
Yes, they have. So now I was going to take a little time to talk about myself. Okay, question 1. By governor's request, or at the governor's request, and passed by the legislature on a party line vote in 2021, the Climate Commitment Act, Senate Bill 5126, became law. Part of that law includes a greenhouse gas emissions cap and invest program that will start on January 1st, 2023. Based on the Department of Ecology's projections released this summer, Washington State's new tax on CO2 emissions will add about 46.6 cents to the cost of a gallon of gas in 2023. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Washington residents already pay about 70 cents per gallon more than the average price in the United States. What is your position on the law, and what action needs to be taken, if any?
Well, let's start with climate change. Climate change is a global issue. Washington State has about 7 million people in it, which makes it about 1,000% of the world population. Nothing we do in Washington State is going to solve the climate change issue. We cannot destroy our economy. No single state, no single nation is going to be able to solve this problem. It's going to need a global solution. So that's where I would start. And what we need to do is we need to look at our energy needs. Mandates don't work, we know that. They drive up cost, they drive up cost, I said that already. So just to come out and say, we'll do something, doesn't mean it's going to happen. In the last legislative session, the Republicans put forward a bill to examine the energy grid. We need to look at energy holistically, including hydroelectric, gas and oil, solar, wind, and nuclear. Thank you.
The U.S. Supreme Court, as a result of its June 2022 landmark decision, Carson et al. Versus Macon, has now made it clear that no state may prevent families from using a generally available public tuition assistance program to send their children to private religious schools. Lawmakers in Washington State are now free to debate choice bills like the 4 bills that were introduced in last year's session. Those bills would have given families who want options up to $10,000 to send their children to private school. If the state legislature were to pass these bills, private religious schools must be included in the list of possible options families have to educate their children. What is your position on this issue and the legislation introduced in 2022?
I am a firm believer in school choice. The money should follow the students. Why is this so important? Number one, it would require public schools to compete, and competition makes everybody better. Right now, public schools don't have to compete for funding. They automatically get it. So we need to look at education and how we're funding it, and I would certainly support if they're homeschooling, if they're going to private schools, if they're going to charter schools. You know, we're still running the schools on a 19th century model of 182 days where, you know, people would get out of school in the summertime to go work the farm. We need to relook at how we do education. There is so much more for students to learn now than there was 100 years ago. There's more for teachers to teach. Maybe we need to start looking at giving them both more time to teach and more time to learn. Thank you.
Children are returning to the classroom, but there is no dispute that the COVID lockdown has set our children back in their education and that math and reading skills have declined. Further, there is a significant percentage of children that have not returned to the public classroom for reasons unknown to the schools and the Office of Public Instruction. What do you believe needs to change to improve our public education and improve children's test scores?
Well, that goes back to what I was talking about too, about looking at how we educate our children, you know, and how much time we get them in the classroom. The lockdown obviously hurt everyone, and we can never do that again. We can never lock children out of schools. And as I said, improving test scores, improving all of that, that goes back to competing for the funds and giving parents the choice where they send their kids. And also requiring public schools to compete in an open market and not have a closed market where they can just continue to get their funds. The other thing is, and fortunately we only have one school district in Pierce County that's on strike. We need to end that. Public employees are not allowed to strike. It's against the law. Firemen can't strike, policemen can't strike, but teachers can't. So what are the teachers saying to the students when they're breaking the law? So that needs to change also. Thank you.
Governor Inslee has taken several actions in recent years to direct his agencies, especially the Department of Ecology and the Building Council, to adopt rules to implement his environmental goals. Many impacted stakeholders view this aggressive rulemaking action to be a legislative responsibility and not within the powers of a non-elected body. What are your views on this issue, and if elected, what actions will you take to return decision-making to the legislature?
You, the people, elect us to represent you in Olympia. You don't elect bureaucrats. You don't elect commissioners to make decisions for you. The governor, as you were saying, the legislature made a ruling and the governor went around the legislature I can't remember the name of the board, and made changes. That's not our republic. That's not the way we're supposed to do government. Like I said, I've been in Washington my whole life, and what I've seen is over the years, the legislature continues to pass laws advocating their power to bureaucracies. I want to see that end. I want to see legislators take responsibility for the legislation they pass and make it stick. Thank you.
The Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force officers placed the blame for the dramatic increase in auto thefts on two pieces of legislation which are preventing them from doing their job. The first severely restricts police ability to pursue the criminal. The second law prevents officers from talking to suspected criminals that are juveniles without an attorney present. As a result, it is believed that the gangs are hiring minors to commit crimes. Do you believe that their assessment is accurate? And if so, what will you do to correct this problem if elected?
We have to repeal those laws. We have to give the police back their power. Sadly, just last week, a woman who was on her way to work was killed when she was struck by a car driven. She was struck by a stolen vehicle. And the other side wants to make car theft just, it's a non-violent crime. It's not a non-violent crime. People are dying every day because of car theft. So if you're in a car and it's stolen, you need to go to jail. Bottom line.
One of the state's actuaries and the research organization, Washington Policy Center, find that the Washington Cares Long-Term Care Act is and will continue to be insolvent by at least $15 billion unless the mandatory payroll tax is increased substantially. Further, the benefit allowed under the law is $36,500, which is well understood to be an amount inadequate for any long-term care for more than a few short months. The legislature placed a constitutional amendment on the ballot to create additional funding for the program. It failed 54 to 46%. The only action last session by the legislature was to create more exemptions to the mandatory tax and delay the tax for a year. This issue must be addressed in the coming session. What do you propose for a solution to the long-term health care program?
Another tax on working people is not the answer. The government, Washington State budget has doubled in the last 10 years. I believe we can find money to take care of the long-term care without raising taxes. And that's the end of my answer.
The state Supreme Court has agreed to a direct review of the lower court's decision declaring that the legislature acted illegally in passing the capital gains tax. The lower court stated that the application of the capital gains tax meets the definition of an income tax, which is restricted by the state constitution. This decision is expected the decision is expected prior to the legislature convening in 2023. What is your position on the current capital gains tax, and what legislative action, if any, is needed on this issue?
Washington State had a $15 billion budget surplus this year. Why do we need a new tax? Why do we need a new tax? That's what this is capital gains tax. I am opposed to capital gains tax. I believe it is actually an income tax, and per the state constitution, it is not allowed. If the Supreme Court rules that it is allowed, then I will work with the legislature to get the law repealed. We don't need more taxes. We need less spending. It's never been a funding problem in the state of Washington. It's always been a taxing problem. Thank you.
Much has been done at the state and local level to improve housing for low income and remove the homeless from the streets. Do you believe more needs to be done? Also, how do we ensure that the middle class doesn't get squeezed out of the marketplace in the process?
Now that's a really good question, because the middle class is getting squeezed left and right. We're getting squeezed with the idea that that the minimum wage should be a living wage. I want everyone to make a living wage, but the minimum wage was designed as a place to start, not the place to finish. The direction they're taking right now is that this homeless crisis is going to be with us forever. And I don't believe that. I believe that we can solve this problem and we can do it in a way that doesn't cost millions and millions of dollars. What we need is some accountability. Where is the money going? And why isn't it going to the people that need it? They spend money and so much of it gets wasted on administrative cost. And that needs to end. We need to have legislation in place that says that, only so much can go to administrative costs. Say 10% of the money allocated and make it stick. Thank you.
Injuries in the workplace caused by repetitive motions, such as a grocery clerk scanning the price of products, is regulated by the federal government, and our state labor and industries implements the regulation. These regulations are known as ergonomic regulations. Organized labor pushed a bill last session to impose heavier regulation at the state level and to increase the compensation of workers' comp to workers. Businesses, especially small businesses, oppose the state exceeding an already stringent federal rule. The bill passed the House on a party line vote and failed to be brought to a vote on the Senate floor in the waning days of the session. What is your view of the issue, and if elected, how will you vote if this issue is brought back in the 2023 session?
Boy, I wish I had an answer to that question. I don't know an answer to that question. I would really have to look into that more. We're talking about repetitive injuries like carpal tunnel syndrome and that sort of thing, And I was injured on the job once, and I went through that whole process. And my understanding was that Elle and I didn't look at what caused the injury. They just looked at how you were being treated for the injury. So maybe we need to look more at how the injury is occurring and how we can stop them from happening without more government interference.
Are you familiar with the most recent state's forecast by the Economic Forecast Council? If so, what is the projected surplus or deficit at this time? How does the legislature need to address the budget next session?
Well, first off, is the budget should be the first thing the legislature works on. They shouldn't wait until day 100 to start working on the budget. They need to put it out there day one and save all that other, naming the state dinosaur and, whatever else, that they want to put out there to make people feel good. The budget is the number one job of the legislature. So I would support day one, we get budget proposals out there, this legislature works on the budget until it's completed, and then we move on to these feel-good legislations. And like I said, been in the Pierce County my whole life and in Washington, and it seems it's always backwards. You know, they're doing the feel-good legislation first and then waiting until the end of the session to get the budget. We actually had to go into special session a couple of times to get a budget passed. That's just not the way we should be doing it.
Okay, that was the last question, and so now, Mr. Figuracion, you have 3 minutes for your closing statement.
I don't know if I can talk for 3 minutes. So in closing, what I want to say is that I've been working my entire life. I got my first job at 16. I worked at Jack in the Box. And that's what I've done my whole life. I've worked, you know. I haven't been involved in politics as I want to be. My opponent has spent the last 10 years in government, and our choice this election cycle is very simple. You know, do we want more of the same? Do we want more of the same progressive policies that have caused out-of-control crime, a homeless crisis, and gas prices to skyrocket? My answer is no. My answer is it's time to make that change, and I ask that you vote for me and write me a check on the way out the door. Thank you very much.